Hey guys, Brandon Koalas here, Director of the Salt Lake Community College Concurrent Enrollment Program, and today in this episode we are going to be talking about how we handle exceptions and appeals, and we're also going to talk a little bit about failure and how we've sort of created a culture of, failure is okay here at the college. Now, I don't know about you, but one thing that just drives me insane is entitlement and this sort of aversion to failure that exists, not just here in concurrent enrollment, but all over the place. There's just such an aversion to failure out there. And, back when I started as the director of concurrent enrollment here, one of the things that had resulted from that sort of drive to not fail and that drive for entitlement was exceptions, and a lot of exceptions, and they had gotten way out of control. And we just got so tired of hearing those because, one day had turned into 2 days. Well, you made an exception for 2 days. Can't you make an exception for 3 days? Can't you make an exception for 4 days? And it just kept getting pushed to the point where our rules, our policies, our procedures really meant nothing. A deadline passed. Sometimes as far as an entire semester had gone by and people would call up and say, well, but the student didn't know about registration. Can we just register them and then put a grade after the fact? The teacher will give the grade here. And we were just our office was so crazy busy and so frustrated at the time in dealing with these exceptions because there was a level of inequity and unfairness that was going on. I mean, think about it. You've got one school over here who they are by the books, by the rules. When the deadline hits, they're telling their students, I'm sorry, registration deadline's done. We're gonna have to transfer you out of the class. And then you got another school over here, or some parents where there's a lot of entitlement, and they're calling up and say, well, but I know they didn't, my kid didn't know, or they didn't tell me, so you need to make an exception even though it's 4 months after the deadline. And then we would make this exception. And so you're sort of giving benefits to those who are not following the rules, and those who are they've got students too that would love to have had those sort of exceptions, but they didn't ask for them because they upheld our deadlines. So we began to realize that really the only way to be fair to everyone is to have a rule, have a deadline, and stick to it across the board. That was the only way for us to truly be fair and equitable. However, there are always going to be special exceptions. There's going to be times where there's system failures or where something comes up that's just completely out of anybody's control and the deadline has arrived and you're going to need to make an exception. The question though is, how do you find that balance? Where do you hold to the rule and where do you make exceptions? So we're going to talk about that today, and I'm going to go through sort of what we do here at the college in order to maintain a balance and hold to the deadlines, but also allow for appropriate, legitimate exceptions. So that said, let's come over to the board. I'm going to walk you through a few things that we do here at the Salt Lake Community College. Okay, so when it comes to exceptions, the first thing that you need to ask yourself is what really matters. Sometimes rules, deadlines, policies can get out of control because you have so ridiculously many policies and procedures and rules that have been created over the year to cover every little possible thing that could go wrong that it becomes unsustainable to try to monitor and enforce all of them. So then what happens is you create this inconsistency out there in the high schools. It's like some rules we don't enforce, some we're flexible on, and others we're not. And that creates confusion and frustration. Because you think of it, as a parent, if I have a rule for my children and sometimes I enforce it and sometimes I don't, that's really stressful for the kids because they don't know when do I have to follow this rule and when don't I? So the more you can be consistent, the more pleasant it is for everybody out there. So look at your rules, look at your policies, look at your procedures and ask yourself, of these 100, which ones are absolutely critical to the function and operation of our program and the fulfilling of our purpose? So you need to ask yourself that question too, because there may be some that you say, well, our program could operate without this, but we won't achieve our objective that's mentioned in our purpose. As we talked about in the previous episode. So go through and figure out what really matters. Once you've done that, then you need to ask yourself, of those 100 that I've now reduced down to 5 that we really need to make sure these happen by the deadline, by the policy, what is a legitimate exception? Is I didn't know about a legitimate exception? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, depending on the policy or the rule. What about, there was a system failure? What about a health issue? Maybe a health issue comes up and that is legitimate, or maybe it's not. Maybe they had 6 months to get this thing done. They waited till the last minute and then they had a health issue come up and so they say, well, I had a health issue. That may or may not be. So sit down and figure out with these policies and procedures, what would constitute a legitimate exception, and define that. Next, you need to ask yourself, who ultimately decides whether or not we will grant the appeal or the exception, and who doesn't make that decision? Is it the director of the program? Is it the office staff? My recommendation, because in the past we operated in a place where those decisions were made by an individual, and the danger of that is that typically when an exception arises, there is an emotion behind that. Because what happened? Well, the parent or the student missed the deadline, didn't get the points they wanted, they didn't get an opportunity, and now they're angry, they're sad, or they're manipulative at times. And when that happens and they talk to an individual and they're blaming that individual, then what happens? Emotions rise. And when you're in an emotional state, when you're angry, when you're upset, when you're depressed or whatever, frustrated, do you make a good decision? Probably not. So if a parent comes up and they're yelling at you, you're going to be like, no, I'm not going to grant this stupid exception. Like, you get out of here. Or if they call up and they give you a sob story and they're crying and your heart goes out to them, it's like, oh, I feel really bad. Yeah, we'll make the exception. Little did you know, though, that the high school had told them 15 times that they needed to get this done, gave them flyers, reminded them, called them, and the student just didn't do it, and now their scholarship is at stake. Is that really an exception that you want to grant? So what we've discovered is that it's important to have a committee make these decisions who is completely separated from the emotion of the exception. Because what happens then is, and this is beautiful, this is one of the things that we discovered. So when you have a committee that is looking at it objectively and they're distanced from the emotion, they're making better decisions, but also what happens is now the parent calls the director, or they call the front office and they say, I am ticked off and you're to blame. And they start yelling, and the person can sit there and listen, let them calm down a little bit and say, hey, you know what? Like, we actually, I understand the situation you're in. I can understand your frustration, and I really want to be able to help you. Now, typically in our office, or you could even say, and we have this appeals process. Now, I want to say that typically, in a lot of cases, we'll hold to the deadline, but we understand that there are exceptions, and we have an appeal process. So how about if I sit down, I'm going to help walk you through this appeal process so I can help you be successful and give you the best chance possible that when you submit the appeal, it goes to the committee and hopefully they'll grant it. Now, I can't promise anything, and there's a good chance that it won't be granted, but there is a chance that it could be. So let's now talk about how I can help you be successful in the appeal process instead of saying, talk to the hand because the face ain't listening. So when you create a committee to make that decision, two things happen. You take the pressure off of the front desk people or the individual who before was making the decision, and you separate the emotions. So when the appeal goes to the committee, they can then make some phone calls, find out the whole story, because there's always more than just one side to the story. So they'll make some phone calls, gather some information, and then they can make that decision completely free of emotion, free of bias, and they make fantastic decisions. Also, one of the things that I talked to my boss about, because I used to have people would call me, I would say no, and then they would go to my boss and he would say yes. And I talked to him and he said, well, when an individual makes the decision, it's easy for that to become biased. But when a committee makes a decision, I'm going to be way more likely to back up a committee of competent, professional, expert individuals in that topic who have made the decision, When that decision comes from a committee, it's a lot easier to say, the committee has spoken. I do not override the decision of the committee. So I would highly recommend when you talk about who decides, form a committee. Figure out who that committee is. The last thing I want to talk about, and then I'm going to show you our appeal process for several of our different appeals. But the next thing I want to point out is the importance of sort of creating a culture of failure being a good thing. There are too many people out there that believe that failure is the end of the world, and that could not be farther from the truth. In fact, if a student goes through high school and goes through this concurrent enrollment experience believing that failure is the end of the world, then when they get out into life and mom and dad aren't, sweeping the path or bulldozing the path or whatever, and there's no support system in the high school and they have a failure, what's that going to do to them? That's going to knock them down severely. So if students can learn in high school and in concurrent enrollment that failure is a good thing, failure is a gift, and when presented that gift, you're able to learn, you're able to grow, then when you create that culture out there, that you don't get as many requests for these exceptions. Maybe you do, but they've sort of learned that, sure, I failed, I'm not going to appeal for exception. I'm going to learn from my mistake and figure out when I try again that, I need to not do this, I need to do this more, and etc. So as much as you can, try to create this culture. You can create it within the classrooms, you can create it at the high schools, you can create it with your staff. But the more you can get that message out there that failure is a gift, the more of a powerful impact you're going to have on the lives of students and individuals. Now, of course, you don't want to say, hey, let's push everybody and make them fail. You want to set things up so they can be as successful as possible. But in the end, people are going to fail. Students are going to fail. So how do you create a support system out there so that when they do fail, there's folks around them to say, that is awesome, you failed. That's great. What did you learn? What do you need to do next time so that when you have the same experience again, you can get up, you can move on, you can be awesome. So establish that culture that failure is okay. All right. So those are some things that you should think about when you're forming an appeals process and you're dealing with exceptions. Now let me jump over to the computer here, and I'm going to walk you through our appeals process, or a couple of those, and sort of how they're structured. All right, so here we are on the process map of how we handle appeals here in our office. So it all begins with a student or parent when some sort of an inquiry is made regarding a concurrent policy or deadline. So they ask a question about the deadline coming up or the rule or whatever, and then the student is informed that the deadline has passed or the policy is firm. So if they accept the answer at that point, then the process is done. We can get on our way and everything is fantastic. If they don't, and if they push it, then we inform and guide the students. So this would be the concurrent enrollment or the admissions staff, whoever they end up calling. So they're going to inform the student about the appeal process and sort of guide them or walk them through that process and how they can be successful. They'll also give them a warning that there's a fair chance that the appeal, when it's submitted, may or may not be approved. So there is no guarantee, and there's probably a greater likelihood that it'll be denied than it'll be approved, although they'll typically listen to their circumstances, and if it falls under one of the exception rules or what qualifies a legitimate exception, then they'll let the student know that, hey, there is a good chance. So let's just make sure that when you gather this document or write this thing that you include this stuff. So that conversation happens, and then the student is redirected to the appeal. Okay, so now I'm going to jump over to the Concurrent Enrollment website and show you where they get this information. So the student then is redirected here to the Concurrent website, and if we scroll down, there's a section called the Student Guide. And under the Student Guide is a section for appeals. So the student comes here, and the Concurrent Enrollment Office staff will help them figure out which appeal they fill out. You'll notice we have three. We have the general registration appeals. It says they didn't hit a registration deadline, and so they're wanting to appeal that, registration or admissions. There's an appeal to take more than 18 credits in a semester, which is the college's limit. And then last of all, there is an appeal for students under the age of 15 to participate in concurrent enrollment, and there's a form for each of those. So let's go ahead and take a look first at the registration appeal form. So I'm going to jump over to Word now. And here we have the registration appeal form. Now you'll notice here on the form, first of all, we have a description of what this registration appeal form is for and the rules surrounding the registration appeal process, so that they're clear on what this appeal is all about and whether or not their situation, their circumstances would justify using this form. Next, we have a list of what constitutes exceptional circumstances and what documentation do you need to provide us. So right here, we clearly define, here is what constitutes an exception. We also define and clarify what does not constitute exceptional circumstances. So when the student then goes home and reads through this, they can see it and say, I have a medical issue. I'm hopeful now that this will be granted. Or I'm saying that I didn't really understand that there was a deadline or policy because I didn't read the documents my teacher had. They'll read this and say, maybe I won't submit this. So it clearly states here what the committee is going to be looking at when they're reviewing this appeal process or this appeal form. Next, we go down to the process and notification. So this describes this appeal process. What happens after they fill this out and submit it? How do they submit it? How do they get notified? All that's right here. And then down below, we have the critical information that we need in order to make the decision and then also to process the appeal. So they fill that out, the student signs it, the parent signs it, and the high school coordinator signs it. That way, all critical stakeholders are in the loop that this appeal is being submitted. And then it's sent into our office. Now, once it comes into our office, let's jump back here to the process map. So once it's submitted to the Concurrent at SLCC email, it goes to the Concurrent Enrollment Administrative Assistant. The Administrative Assistant then reviews it and just check to see if all of the required documents, which are listed on the appeal, are included. If they are not included, then a denial letter is sent via email with a list of missing information. We used to have this email conversation back and forth to say, oh, you missed this. Then they'd send it and say, oh, and you didn't include this. But that took so much time and energy. We figured they need to learn how to read an appeal document. They need to learn how to follow instructions. And if they can't, it's denied. And once it's denied, then at that point, the student may accept the decision and move on. Or the student may want to add some additional information and resubmit that. So it's their call, and that's sort of where it goes if the appeal package is not complete. Now, if it is complete, then the administrative assistant creates a folder on our shared network drive and adds the appeal documents. So let me show you here. This is the folder on our shared network drive. So we have an appeals folder, and inside of there we have a folder for each year. We have active appeals, closed appeals, and then we classify like the under 15 and some of the other categories. So you can organize your folder however you want, but we put the folders or the documents in those folders, and then we send an email to the appeals committee and say, hey, guess what? We just uploaded a new appeal. All of you go ahead, take a look at it, review it, and then once they review it, within the student folder is a decisions folder, and they will type up their decision and place it in there. Now, one thing that we do not do is explain to the student why we accepted or denied the appeal, because what we found is that when you explain the reason why you denied it, a lot of times there is pushback from that. They want more information. They say, well, but, and they really push back about it. So in the end, the decision is the committee has reviewed the appeal and based on the documented evidence has decided to deny the appeal. They may have a one brief sentence if it makes sense to say denied the appeal because of, and just very briefly, high level, not nitty-gritty detail, because like I said, there's a lot of pushback. But the less, the better, denied or approved, the end. Okay, so those decisions are included within the appeals folder for that student. And then the administrative assistant goes back. So let's jump back over here to the process map. So the appeal package is completed, creates the folder, creates a blank decision file, Word document, and places it in the folder for the committee to type on. And then we have the different types of appeal. Let's follow the registration appeal. So if it's a registration, an email is sent to the coordinator, to the CE coordinator for additional information. So before we email the appeal committee, a letter or an email is sent to other stakeholders who may have another version of the story that the student is telling us to gather some documentation. What does the teacher have to say about it? What does the high school have to say about it? Are they saying the same thing the student is? If so, that's fantastic. And if not, then we can use that evidence to say we're denying the appeal. And sometimes, like I said before, if a student says, they give a sob story and then you call and you find out the high school has reminded them multiple times, they've warned them, they told them no, and they're still pushing it, that's good to know in making a good decision. So an email is sent to the coordinator. We gather some additional information from the teacher of the high school. Next, a request is sent to the concurrent enrollment coordinator in our office, who gathers more information in our banner system. So they'll pull information there, registration records, attempts to register, other things, and then adds that to the iDrive appeals folder. Once all that's gathered for these registration appeals, then the committee is notified, and then they go ahead and review the process. So down here, you can see the committee reviews it, they note their decision, and then it goes back to the administrative assistant who tallies up the decision of the committee. And it's always an odd number. That's important too. If you have an even number, you can come to, sort of a standstill. So you want to make sure you've got 3, so that way you can always have a yes or a no. So that's important to make note of. So tally the 3 individuals' decision, and then we have a template that they use to send out the final decision letter on behalf of the concurrent enrollment director to both the student and the high school coordinator. So that letter is put together, it's sent out. If it's denied, then we move that appeal to the from the active folder to the closed folder, and then the process is done. If it's approved, then we notify the concurrent enrollment coordinator in the concurrent enrollment office, who then performs the override, and everything is done. So that is the registration appeal process. Now, if I come back over here, I'm just going to jump over to Word, and I want to show you the other appeals. So I've showed you the registration form. Now let me show you in under 18. So each appeal looks different because there's different information that we need in order to make a decision depending on what it is, what rule or policy we're reviewing for. So in the under 8, or it's not under 18, it's 18 or more credits appeal, there's some information we need. We need to find out, does this student have a history of being able to maintain a heavy load and be successful? So we're going to need some documents in order to make that decision. Also, here on the form, we state rules and policies that exist around the 18 credits. So for example, the state law says that a student may not take more than 30 credits in a year. So if they're taking 18 this year, they can't take more than 12 next year. They need to be aware of that. Also, there are limits. So we will not approve more than 21 credits in a semester. And the student must have completed 12 credits with a 3.0 or better in order to even think about submitting this. Next, they submit several items of documentation, their high school transcripts, so we can look at how they've performed historically, a copy of the college transcript, and academic plan, because we don't want them to say, I'm taking 18 or 21 credits and I have no idea what I'm studying. I'm just randomly taking a bunch of junk credits. That is a no. So if there's no academic plan, we want to show they're being intentional about the classes they're taking. And then a signed letter from the counselor that says, this student is brilliant, they're really on top of it, they're responsible, they're going to be great. So that information is gathered, and then we gather some information from the student, and that goes off to the committee. So that's a quick overview of some of our appeal processes, and you're welcome to come to our website if you'd like. Go to that same place I showed you, and you can check out the under 15 appeal. You'll notice there's an essay form and an application, and a form. So there's more documentation we need for that, but I'm not going to go through it. I'll let you take a look at it. All right, so hopefully that has been beneficial for you, giving you some ideas of some things that you can do to rein in those exceptions. And I will promise you that as you do that, your program will operate so much better. People will appreciate it more because it's a lot easier in the high school for them to tell a student, unfortunately, the deadline has passed and be done with it, than begin this battle of an exceptions and appeals. It takes so much time, so much energy, that if you have a rule and you stick to it consistently, things just operate so much more beautifully. Now, I will also say that if you have been operating a program where exceptions and appeals are the norm, you're in for a bit of a painful journey. You're in for some failure. You're going to fall down. You're going to get hurt, but stick with it. It'll be painful. People will complain. They'll call you names. They'll point fingers. They'll yell. They'll be upset. But after a while, as they get used to the fact that deadlines are deadlines, then, and rules are rules, then I can guarantee that in the end they'll come back to you and say, things just operate so much better. Life is so much better here in running our program because we're not wondering whether or not this appeal or this request to an exception is going to be granted. We clearly understand what matters to you. We know what is a legitimate appeal because you've written it down here. So when a student comes to us and says, but, I can look at the list and say, ooh, you know what? You fit within one of these exceptions here, or you don't. So you can appeal, but you're probably not going to get granted. Do you want to do it? And most times they're like, probably not. So, and then you take care of the decision. And who makes those decisions? Just everything. Life is so much better. All right. As always, post any comments, questions, ideas that you have in the video below. And until next time, remember that nothing is impossible. If you think outside the box that's been built around you, if you are resourceful, you may not have the resources, but you're resourceful. You find ways to make it happen. And last of all, if you have the courage to act.